Hi everybody, Sage Man here. It is September 19th, 2020. It has been over 6 months since there's been a podcast or any other piece of activity here on the TAPAS channel. This is my first addition to the channel since the coronavirus crisis hit back in March. At the time, many creative types, myself included, hoped that quarantine would be a time to safely hide away at home and be creative, but as it turns out, most people have been either too bummed or too overworked for that to work out for them. Myself, I've been both for much of the intervening time. Restaurant opened on March 18th, and it was safe to stay open from the beginning. Drive-in restaurant, everyone stays in their cars. We've been doing takeout only. And, we must have been the only restaurant in town that was open because we were swamped beyond belief. It was absolutely killing me when we first started. Calmed down eventually. Now it's September and the season is over. Went through an entire work year without once updating the YouTube channel. I feel pretty shitty about that. So, what's been happening with TAPAS over the course of the past 6 months? Not a lot, The podcast is kind of the center of it all. But, the big news, big news, and, oh gosh, this was a long time ago, the film reviewer Bob Show has subscribed to the channel. I first got on his radar last year when I donated $1,000 to his vacation fund in order to win a Skype conference with him, and we talked. And then a few months later we started talking again. We're both shy, and now he's subscribed. And so someone called Dream Master, hello Dream Master, if you're still around, So yeah, some point, like 6 months ago, I very briefly had 15 subscribers, but then the next day I was back down to 14. I guess someone ditched me. That's sad. Regardless, I'm here now, I'm healthier, I'm hoping to breeze through these last 10 episodes of podcast season 1 so I can start podcast season 2 and go back to actually talking about tapas instead of all the Disney and Droon and whatever else it is I do around here. The tapas podcast stopped being about tapas some time ago because nothing ever happens in tapas. So, let's launch right into the segments, most of which I, in fact, wrote fairly promptly, quite a few months ago. I just haven't been, I've made some tweaks, and I'm just going to go ahead and plow right through the script. Okay, today in Keys and Kingdoms, it's 1993, and we're starting the year off with Homeward Bound, The Incredible Journey. That's an adaptation of a book called simply The Incredible Journey, which I only know because I saw that book in a library once, and a remake of a 1963 Disney film also called simply The Incredible Journey, which I only know because when I went to find this film on Disney+, the 1963 original was there too. As for what I know about this film, well, I saw it. It aired on the Disney Channel when I was incredibly young. I also saw its sequel when I was slightly less young, but still very young. The sequel's not on my list. I think the sequel is Homeward Bound 2: Lost in San Francisco. The 1963 original, isn't on my list either, obviously, because, again, I didn't know there was a 1963 original until just now. And at the time, the movie was, in fact, not on Disney+. Existing agreements, some of their films, they had to wait until their contract expired with other streaming services before they could get all things Disney on there. They really need to display that more clearly because I wasn't prepared for the realization. They rent it on YouTube, grumble. It's on, the film's on Disney Plus now, of course, but anyway. We open on some narration from Michael J. Fox, playing a young bulldog by the name of Chance, who is physically portrayed by a very real bulldog by the name of Rattler. That's a cool name. I've named a character or two Rattler in my day. Chance is a rescue pup, recently adopted by some family who already have 2 other pets. Sassy, a fuzzy Himalayan played by a cat called Tiki and voiced by Sally Field, and Shadow, an elderly golden retriever played by a dog called Ben, and voiced by 30s and 40s leading man Don Ameche in one of his final film roles. He did not live to reprise his role in the sequel. Now, 1993, so actually there's no CGI in this dog movie, not even to make the animals' mouths move, as many lower echelon Disney films are rather infamous for doing. Rather, the animal actors perform, and then the voice actors perform over that. As in most talking animal films, the animals can understand each other, they can understand the humans fairly well, and the humans can't understand the animals, only this time around, you don't have to wonder why the humans never notice the animals' odd gesticulating, because, again, all the animal effects in the movie are purely done through real animal performances. Big studios in the past year or so have been working on, phasing out trained animals in films in favor of using CGI animals. It's a very safe and ethical decision. When it works, and it's not incredibly distracting for your viewing audience. I know Disney itself did an adaptation of Call of the Wild a while back, and the dog being animated was very distracting. The family consists of Bob, played by Robert Hayes, who in the opening scene is just marrying Laura, played by Kim Greist. Laura has 3 kids already, and each of the 3 kids owns one of the 3 Petses, though Chance's narration phrases it as the other way around. That's adorable. Petses think they own the humans, and they're not entirely wrong, eh? The family, it seems, are moving to San Francisco temporarily for Bob's business, and they'll be boarding the pets at a friend's ranch during that time due to the cramped conditions in Frisco. Apartment, I assume, and I may need to revise my earlier statement that the pets can understand the peoples, because the peoples are talking quite openly about having to leave the animals behind, and the animals are not reacting in the slightest. Maybe they don't speak English beyond proper names and pet commands. After the wedding, the family bring the Petses to the ranch of Kate, played by Jean Smart, before heading off to Frisco, super sad about having to leave their lovely pets behind. Unfortunately, the pets can only detect the sadness and the leaving and cannot understand the promise that they'll be up to visit in 2 weeks. Oh, sad Petses. Reminds me of when I lived with Mom and I worked at a local cafe, and Poppy always got upset when I went to work. Shadow, though confused, is confident that the peoples will come back. Next morning, Kate feeds the trio some breakfast. This is just a cute doggo movie. The interactions are cute, and the 3 leads, really good actors. The animals, that is. Though the voice actors are good too, but I gotta wonder how you have to treat a dog or a cat all its life to get such convincing performances out of it. I bet it's not such a nice life. Chance has fun with the horses and pigs and chickens and turkeys. His background as a stray means he's uninterested in the question of whether the humans will come back. And he finds there's more to do on the ranch. But after the first week, Kate has to go on, I forget what she said, some kind of trip involving horses, just for a few days, so she leaves a note for her neighbor Frank. Unfortunately, one of the note's 2 pages gets lost, so while Kate says she's taken the trio into town with her a few times and advises Frank to do the same, the single-page note makes it look like she says she's taken them on her trip. Oh no! So Shadow and Sassy are more confused than ever when Kate drives away, and Chance starts to have a little panic attack as it reminds him of his past at the pound. Shadow resolves to find his boy and escapes the enclosure, heading back home. Sassy and Chance reluctantly follow to keep him safe, and they find their way into the mountains. Sure enough, Frank misinterprets Kate's half a note, though to his credit he finds it hard to believe he's reading it right. They make it to the top of the mountain, where they see more mountains. Clearly, Kate's ranch is not as close to home as they thought. Shadow is undeterred. A travel montage is a good time to pause and think about what the film can offer for keys and kingdoms. I haven't said those words in so long. I guess the way animals think, I've been neglecting that part. It was one of the original pillars of Keys and Kingdoms, the wildlife theme. I've been working on a Keys and Kingdoms encyclopedia, which is making me realize just how little Disney influence the setting actually has. It's basically just a D&D setting with a couple of homebrew races. I gotta make it more Disney-esque, or at least more original and well-developed. It's truly in a terrible place right now, Keys and Kingdoms, as a project. That's what I'm here for. They sleep through the night, after Shadow tells some spooky horror stories about moose, and then they catch some fish for breakfast. They have a run-in with a bear. Could it be? Yes, it is. Hollywood superstar Bart the Bear. That's right. If you've ever seen a brown bear in a film made between 1980 and 2000, odds are good you were looking at Bart, an exceptionally well-trained Kodiak bear, renowned throughout Hollywood for, being a bear. A bear who does as he's told. Tallest actor in the business at 9'7". River crossing. Okay, it's a nice RPG game obstacle. Oh dear, Sassy falls into the river and gets swept away and the dogs have to rescue her. That's perilous, and dear God, I hope the cat in most of these shots is a puppet. Otherwise, that's incredibly cruel. Yeah, is she going off the waterfall? Yeah, it looks that way. Yeah, it looks like it's nighttime, and Shadow and Chance still haven't found her. Shadow blames himself, and we get an amazing long speech about why a dog is man's best friend. The next day, we see a bald eagle, but hear a red-tailed hawk. That's typical of Hollywood, Real eagles are majestic and all, but they don't sound as cool. And some old guy finds Sassy washed up on the riverbank and, helps her, regain her bearings, get back to health. Kate returns to her ranch and realizes the misunderstanding she's had with Frank. So forest rangers are called, and Kate frets. You see her fretting, and the family are informed. Lost pet posters are spread around. The old guy keeps taking care of Sassy, while meanwhile the mountain lion stalks Chance and Shadow. I meant to say a mountain lion, not the mountain lion, in case you maybe thought I bringing up a mountain lion I didn't mention earlier. Okay, anyway, they run from it and use trickery to fling it into the river. Sassy hears the dog's triumphant barking and escapes the old man, who's happy to let her go. She finds them, and there's a touching, triumphant reunion with hugs and stuff. Pet hugs. Adorable. We see a lot of classic American wildlife on the trek. A raccoon, a skunk, a porcupine, all of which get up to their usual antics, usually inflicting them on Chance. Chance spends a good portion of the next few scenes with porcupine quills in his face. That can't have been pleasant for a Zactor dog. I assume they're glued on. I'm sure Rattler wasn't hurt or anything. Back in Frisco, Shadow's boy Peter goes to the police department to ask for help finding the missing family members. The desk sergeant takes a moment to realize he's describing dogs and a cat and tells Peter the SFPD has better things to do. Suggests that Peter put up lost pets posters, which Bob was already planning to do, so I'm not sure what the point of this scene was apart from cringe. Peter swiftly finds out about Bob's posters and is pleased that his stepfather cares that much. Back in the mountains, Shadow finds Molly, a little blonde girl lost in the forest. The search party looking for Molly arrives the next morning. Chance is apprehensive about approaching strangers, worried they'll end up in the pound, but Shadow regardless leads the search party to Molly. One of the forest rangers recognizes Shadow, Chance, and Sassy from the posters and sends them to an animal shelter and calls Bob. The family race to the animal shelter, while the trio are terrified to realize they've been brought to a pound. Sassy escapes while Chance and Shadow are locked up, not understanding the animal catcher's assurances that the family will be there soon to pick them up. This film really gives me some chills. What must it be like to be an animal and never understand what the heck is going on? It's got to be a life full of fear and confusion sometimes. And then snuggles. I hope the snuggles are sufficient. Yvette works on the quills in Chance's face, while Sassy sneaks into the animal shelter to the sounds of the Mission Impossible theme. Really? And this was 3 years before the Tom Cruise Mission Impossible reboot, mind you, so kind of an obscure reference. Maybe. I don't know how famous Mission Impossible was before they Tom Cruised it. This scene marks the only time in the film where animals other than the three leads talk. Several dogs yell at Sassy as she approaches. Their voice actors are uncredited, but according to IMDb, never a fully trustworthy source, at least one of them is Carol Spinney, the legendary puppeteer who gave life to Big Bird and Oscar the Grouch for almost 50 years before dying sometime last year. Big action scene throughout the pound, and our trio, quote-unquote, escape their well-meaning captivity. Our heroes are big dummies who are needlessly worrying their humans, aren't they? Another travel montage, very well scored. Who did the music for this film? Do we get the scene where the family find out their pets escaped? Not really. That's too bad. I was kind of in the moment for a cruel rug to be pulled out from under them. Only because of my absolute confidence that they'll all be back together in the end, of course. The trio make it back to whatever non-San Francisco suburb it is where the family live. They make their way through a train yard, and Shadow falls into a pit of some sort and gets hurt real bad, breaking a leg. Chance and Sassy try to get him out, but they just can't pull it off. So he urges them to go home without him. Much sad. Meanwhile, the family have returned to their non-San Francisco home and are trying to enjoy themselves without the beloved pets. The kids call Bob Dad, and he's pleased. Chance and Sassy run over the hill into the arms of their kiddos. Peter and the rest of the family only have a few minutes to pine about Shadow not being with them, when he too comes over the hill, limping and out of breath, but all right. The family is back together, and Chance has a newfound appreciation for family, and it's a cute ending that did indeed make my eyes get a little watery. Cute, cute film. And the credits give extra special attention to the American Humane Society notice. Yeah, good call. In a film with this much animal action, you want to display that prominently. Give people the reassurance. Anything else interesting in the credits? Special vocal effects by Frank Welker, not at all surprisingly. Yeah, there's this list of the Hollywood actors whose films have made the most money, collectively. And when that list was first compiled, Frank Welker was number 1, on the technicality that his animal vocal effects have been in nearly every film ever made. Ergo, he is the most profitable actor. That number 1 position now belongs to Stan Lee on a similar technicality. All his cameos. Up next, we have beloved Halloween classic Hocus Pocus. I've never seen this one. Maybe in bits and pieces when I was tiny, but if I've ever seen it in its entirety before, I don't remember having done so. Not exactly seasonal, watching a Halloween movie in March, but dear God, now it's September. There was a time when my schedule said I'd be watching Hocus Pocus and The Nightmare Before Christmas last Halloween. Nearly a year ago. God, depression is a terrible thing. Truly, just this horrible inability to do anything. Even now, it takes so much effort to just hit the play button and start taking notes. Who knows when I'll screw up the nerve to do the actual reading part of the podcast. So, Hocus Pocus. I hear Natty's family watch it every year on Halloween. I was there for Halloween some years ago. Why didn't we watch it? Distracted by me, I suppose. Okay, Kenny Ortega is our director, which surprised me because in my experience he's more of a choreographer, and most of his filmography is therefore known for its dance numbers. I do know there's at least one iconic musical number in this film, but certainly not the kind of elaborate dancing that you'd expect from directed by Kenny Ortega. I guess we'll see. We open in the past. In the bedroom of some colonial boy with the unfortunate name of Thackeray Binks, who is portrayed by Sean Murray but voiced by Jason Marsden. Murray's voice gets dubbed because, if I know the movie by reputation, he spends most of the movie as a talking cat, so it's mostly a voice acting role, hence the casting of pro voice actor Jason Marsden. Does he really need 2 actors? Could Murray not talk convincingly? Could Marsden not act on camera? I know Marsden is extremely short, but he has on-camera experience. Regardless, it is an excellent vocal performance from Jason Marsden. He's a VA with one of the best voices out there. He's just got this incredibly charming, youthful voice. I told him once, that is to say I tweeted at him, I told him the moment I realized that Max Goof from A Goofy Movie and Tino Tonatini from The Weekenders were played by the same actor, that was the moment I realized the voice acting industry was a thing, and that's an obsession that very much rules my life. So what I said to Jason Marsden, I says to him, I says, thanks for my whole life, man. He liked it. He hit the like button on the tweet. He didn't have to do that. So Thackeray is chasing after his little sister Emily, who's in some sort of mysterious trouble. Okay. Cabin in the woods with purple smoke spewing from the chimney. That's nice and witchy. And the witches invite little Emily into their home, the famous trio of witches, the thing everybody remembers about this film, and the actors who get top billing: Bette Midler, Sarah Jessica Parker, and Kathy Najimy. Let's talk about witches in Keys and Kingdoms. Witch, in common modern vernacular, is usually used as the female equivalent to wizard or warlock. In terms of historical religious practices, a witch is a completely different thing, and that's all I know on the subject. Not my first time wondering how to define a Keys and Kingdoms witch. An arcane magic user is a wizard, warlock, or sorcerer, and witch just really doesn't work as a female equivalent to any of those in particular. Perhaps it's just a word, Just something people call any female arcane magic user with presumably negative connotations, regardless of what kind of source their arcane power has, but some women, I guess, own it. Whereas witches, the fairy tale kind of witches, the kind that are warty old women with long noses who live in cottages and eat children, well, those are hags, not witches. Different thing. And they got plenty of those in D&D, some pretty solid lore about them. So I'm looking at the 3 witches from this movie under the assumption that they are in fact hags, a coven of them. A coven is always 3 hags, at least in 5th edition, and the trio collectively get a bunch of wizard spells. So, that fits. Anyway, 3 witches. They want to maybe eat Emily, or something more sinister, a more grand plan to fuel the plot of the movie. Let's find out. And at this point, I got bored with the film and didn't get back to it for like a month, at which point I watched it with Natty. We both pulled it up on our Disney Plus accounts and watched it simultaneously while typing comments to each other. We do that for our date every week, at least we used to, and that got me through it. It might help, since it's one of her favorite movies. Her family watch it every Halloween. Did I say that already? Okay, back to the movie. So it's something more sinister than eating her. They've got a book with a living eyeball on it. Scary, note that, and it's a life potion. They're making a life potion, and at this early stage in the film, I was rather annoyed by the mannerisms of the witches. I hate to do this, but nostalgia critic. I can't talk about this film without mentioning the very high-profile review of it that the nostalgia critic made. One of his first clipless reviews, if I recall correctly. No, it had clips in it. The first ones he did that was loaded with sketches instead of focusing on the movie, I guess. Anyway, yeah, just something he did before his major fall from grace. And, he had a point. Yeah, at this point in the film, I can say he had a point with one of his biggest criticisms of the movie. These characters of the 3 witches aren't funny in the slightest. The actresses just perform as if what they're doing is funny. I think the film would have been better if the witch trio took themselves perfectly seriously as their dialogue and motivations are, as loathsome as that stuff is. I think the witches should have been played for horror and not comedy. I think the film's overall presentation is going about itself the wrong way. So they absorb Emily's life, going from withered old crones to substantially younger women. Thackeray fails to save his sister. He loses the girl and, oh gosh, she doesn't vanish, she just dies. And they cast a spell on Thackeray to make him immortal, so he'll have to forever live with his guilt of failing to save Emily, and also turn him into a cat. Then the village descends on the witches, captures them, and hangs them, but not before their leader, Bette Midler's Winifred, casts a spell declaring that the 3 of them will return when awakened by a virgin on Halloween night and continue their plot to suck up all the children to become young and beautiful. Cat Thackeray tries to catch the attention of his father, but is ignored. 300 years later, on Halloween night, a history teacher tells the story of the witches' hanging, and this is where we meet our protagonist, Max Dennison, played by some dude. A tie-dyed Californian recently moved to what is apparently Salem. I want to say Salem, Massachusetts. Is that where Salem was a thing? Max runs into some bullies while taking a shortcut to the graveyard. You know, your classic 80s and 90s movie bullies, you know. Very cliche. They steal his shoes. He gets home, rages against his parents, feeds his... What kind of pets has he got in that tank? I didn't see them. And then he gets ambushed by his 8-year-old sister, Danny, played by a teeny tiny Thora Birch. And then he has to take her trick-or-treating. She's dressed as a witch, and he dresses like an MCU superhero trying to disguise himself. That's just to say he goes out in just a ball cap and shades. Salem loves its Halloween, even the bullies. I've never personally run into bullies on Halloween, but I stopped trick-or-treating and started hosting trick-or-treating at a much younger age than most folks do. I miss Halloween, man. Haven't had one in years. Maybe... Ugh. Well, that's distressing. When I wrote that line back in, I'm guessing April, I said that I hoped that this year I'll get to go to some big Halloween party in Quincy, as it's late September now, and the COVID death toll just hit 200,000 today. I doubt that. Anyway, my sisters ran into some Halloween bullies a few years ago, and my mom kicked those punks' asses, and the sisters thought it was awesome. They trick-or-treat at Allison's house, Allison being some babe from Max's school who's way out of his league, having a little partay at her family's swanky manor. Danny and Allison talk about boobs, which Danny calls yabos, a term I haven't heard for boobs in very many other places. Maybe one, that being Team Star Kid's Star Wars musical. Allison decides to take Danny and Max to the old Sanderson place where the witches were hanged, which used to be a witchy museum before spooky stuff started happening there. There they find Winifred's spellbook and a candle, and yada yada. Max is the virgin who lights the candle on a full moon Halloween night and resurrects the witches. Cat Thackeray, still alive after all these centuries, tries to stop him, but he does it. Magic stuff happens, and the three Sanderson sisters walk on in. The black flame candle looks neat. That's a nice atmospheric touch. The fire is actually black. Danny is found by the witches and tries to pretend to be a witch and to be on their side to avoid getting eaten or whatever, but it doesn't quite work out. And they try to eat her, so Max comes to her rescue and gets tossed around by the witches' witchy powers. It's Allison and Danny who truly defeat the witches well enough to escape, along with Thackeray. Max and Thackeray manage to nick the spellbook and get out of there, as Thackeray reveals himself to be a talking cat. Burning Rain of Death. That's a nice trick. There are all sorts of tricks you can play on people from previous centuries. The Sanderson sisters have to get accustomed to things like paved roads and police cars and junk. It would be fun and more useful if there was very much modern influence in Keys and Kingdoms thus far, which there isn't at the moment, but there will be. I gotta make it different. And that's never gonna happen. Winifred explains to her sisters that they have until sunrise to find their spellbook and brew their life potion again. Otherwise, this is their last night alive. Thackeray is a really good talking cat. They don't make him that convincing anymore. I mean, that looks like CGI with, how much his mouth moves like a real human mouth. Well, there's a confrontation with the witches who swoop in on their flying brooms to get the book back. The witches can't set foot in the cemetery, but they can fly their brooms above it. And Winifred can resurrect her dead lover, Billy Butcherson, as a zombie, played by Doug Jones. I love Doug Jones. And played by, I noticed in the credits, or when I, he's played by a different actor when he has his head knocked off. What sense does that make? Did they get an actor with no head? And then I saw, okay, I get it now. Doug played the severed head, and then the other guy plays the headless body. Yeah, got it. The heroes escape Billy and flee into some catacombs, and the witches get picked up by a horny bus driver. Okay, this is more fun now. I'm digging it now that the witches are not taking themselves too seriously in the modern world either. And so, yeah, I'm warming up to the atmosphere. Thackeray gets run over by the bus, but he cannot die. That's a curse. It's a curse. Eternal life. Fortunately, not a curse in D&D, because the whole point of D&D is there actually being a risk at all times for everyone, and a potential for victory at all times. So there's nobody in an RPG setting who is truly invincible. The witches find themselves amidst trick-or-treaters and are briefly confuzzled. Then they meet a party host dressed as the devil and take him to be their master, and he recognizes them from their costumes. The heroes get a cop and tell him they brought the witches back, but he just virgin shames Max, sends them on their way, and turns out to just be a guy dressed like a cop, so that was useless. Some little girls snatch the witches' brooms, and this is all very silly and disconnected. Hasn't been much plot in a while, just comedy, but it actually is comedy now. I guess they just didn't have anything funny in the script for the opening scene because it was horrific. Winifred eventually figures out that All Hallows Eve has become a night of frivolity and dressing up in costumes and is rather disappointed. Max and Danny head to an adult Halloween party to find their parents and tell them, but they are once again disbelieved. Max tries to tell the entire party, but the witches pass themselves off as Sanderson's sister cosplayers, and Winifred turns it into a big performance of Screamin' Jay Hawkins' song, I Put a Spell on You. I remember Natty being pretty upset when she found out the song wasn't quite original, especially after I played her the original, which just has a lot of Screamin' Jay just screaming before he gets to the actual song. Winifred takes the opportunity to cast a spell on the partygoers to make them dance until they die. Well, meanwhile, the heroes have to once again flee from Billy. The heroes lure the witches to the high school, and some more silliness happens. The witches are lured into a kiln, which the heroes turn on. Ooh, that's brutal. Nice. The heroes celebrate having seemingly killed off the witches, and Thackeray is about to go off on his own, but the denizens ask if they can adopt him, and he be their cat. That's cute, adopting the immortal talking cat. They call him Binks. All throughout this film, they've been calling him Binks. Last name basis. I shouldn't have been calling him Thackeray all this time. I hate it when people do that. People do that. When people who allege themselves to be fans don't use a character's preferred method of address. Nobody calls Draco Malfoy by his first name, and nobody calls Lightning McQueen by his first name. All the fans do. Don't do that. You're not a real fan if you do that. So the witches just walk right out of the kiln eventually and kidnap the bullies to be ingredients in their potion, deciding to try and make it from memory. That doesn't work out. Winifred calls out for her book, which opens its eye but doesn't really react beyond that. At that moment, Allison wonders if there's a way to look inside the book and find a way to uncurse Binks. Fortunately, opening the book causes it to send out a beacon that Winifred can follow. The witches follow the beacon, riding a modern broom, a mop, and a vacuum cleaner. Classic witch joke. Max's parents still haven't come home, and the witches turn up and steal Danny and the book. And it's worth mentioning that each of the witches has their own power. Kathy Najimy's Mary can sniff out children, and Sarah Jessica Parker's Sarah can lure children in with her siren voice. While Winifred, I suppose her unique power is the lightning bolts and stuff. That, noted. Sarah lures the children to their old house, where they've set up a cauldron with the life potion, tied up Danny, and stuck Binks into a sack. Max arrives at their shack and bluffs that the sun has come up early, freaking out the witches long enough for him to save Danny and Binks and spill the potion, leaving the bullies in the cages and stealing his own shoes back, before the witches realize they've been tricked again. They have just enough potion to use one child to cast the life spell, making them able to make more later when they finally reset the clock. But rather than use it on one of the bullies, Winifred elects to get revenge on Max by chasing him down on her broom. Ew. Another villain done in by pettiness, I assume. They enter the cemetery and have another confrontation with Billy there. Winifred orders Billy to kill Max and absorb Danny, but instead Billy cuts off the stitching on his mouth and starts insulting Winifred. Max is glad to find that Billy is on his side. They keep Danny safe inside a circle of salt and use more salt to fight off the witches. Fortunately, Danny leaves the circle to aid Billy and is snatched up by Winifred. Winnie tries to force Danny to drink the potion, but Binks saves her. Winnie drops the potion and Max drinks it, so Winnie is forced to suck out his life instead of Danny's. But Max is a lot heavier than Danny, and so when Winnie tries to lift him, she falls off her broom and lands on the hallowed ground of the cemetery just as the sun rises. Mary and Sarah are disintegrated by the sun, while Winifred turns to stone and then disintegrates. The final death of the three witches breaks all of their curses, allowing Billy to return to his grave and Thackeray to gently pass away and join his sister Emily in the afterlife. Danny is sad to see him go, so it's a bittersweet moment. Thackeray and Emily walk off into the sunrise as Max, Danny, and Allison watch. And as the credits roll, we see the exhausted adult partygoers, free to their dancing spell, finally leave. The bullies are still stuck in their cages, and the single sleepy eye of Winifred's book remains open. And the cover of I Put a Spell on You was arranged by Mark Shaman. That's neat. He's a fun composer. So that was fun. I think what was holding me back all those months is that I couldn't watch one of Natty's favorite movies without her. I enjoyed it very much. I think the Nostalgia Critic had a point about the beginning of the film, but, what the fuck was he know? What does he know? He was perhaps too influential upon me when I first discovered him a few years ago, but, I'm certainly not the only one. He's the only one. Lots of people looked up to him as an influence, and, fortunately, he's guilty of nothing more than being completely oblivious, so it's not like he left a horrible legacy behind. So anyway, Droon! Haven't been back to Droon in a dog's age. It's the season 5 finale of my dream adaptation, not officially or anything. Special edition number 6, Crown of Wizards. Ooh, we got a nice scary cover there, Gethwing looking uglier than usual. Oh, hey, the back cover. I'm supposed to read the blurbs on the back cover of the special edition skin. I wonder how many times I've forgotten to do that. Here on SE number 6, it's an all-powerful dragon, a wizard turned evil. The world of Droon is in grave danger. Really hitting the beginning of the end here. After Eric turns into Prince Ungast, that's the final arc, very much so. So, here we go. Chapter 1, What's in a Name? The book opens from Ungast's perspective, as he and Gethwing explore the ruins of an ancient Gaulian city, a familiar procedure to Ungast by this point. Ungast just goes along with everything Gethwing is doing and saying, having no memories beyond the 2 days he's existed, just tagging along as Gethwing goes from ruin to ruin, bringing ancient sites in Gaul to life. Gethwing gives Ungast his first mission. Ungast will steal a certain object for Gethwing and bring it back to Gethwing's secret lair on the mountain of Barabork. Ungast sets off in his hot air balloon, accompanied by a trio of nearly silent villains who recur throughout this final arc, the Kindu Hunters, tall and slender warriors dressed in purple, each armed with a different magic item. In Chapter 2, What's in a Face? Meanwhile, in the upper world, Kia is impersonating Eric for his parents. Julie and Neil are sticking by Eric Kia's side tightly to make sure she doesn't say anything too incriminating, and Julie is keeping the enchanted soccer ball on her person at all times as well. Soon they receive their usual message from Galen and take off for the basement, narrowly avoiding Mrs. Hinkle, who's following them down there to ask what's wrong. They hope they'll have formulated an excuse by the time they return to the upper world. The rainbow stairs take them to Mikos, the Isle of the Treasure Queen. Overhead, they see Ungast in his balloon and the 3 Kindu hunters astride their groggles, no doubt here to steal one of Basra's treasures. Chapter 3, Island Stronghold. Kia, Julie, and Neil witness Ungast discussing some stuff with the Kindu, Neil's turban allowing them to overhear them from a distance. I wonder how culturally insensitive Neil's turban is. A white guy in a turban, and turbans being associated with genie magic. I don't know if that would be accepted in a cartoon show made in the 2020s or after. But not talking about the adaptation. Anyway, Ungast uses some very dark ancient Gaulian magic to very gently open a hole in the wall of the treasure fortress. Our current trio, Kia taking the place of Eric in what's normally the trio, ain't that sad, follow Ungast into the forest, and, okay, here's where the Kindu hunters pick up their items. I didn't realize that they didn't have them from the start. I felt like they came out of nowhere in the final book, and I assumed I just missed them when they were first introduced, which I did. They're introduced here. One of the Kindu gets a dagger, one gets a magical wooden spike ball thingy, and the third gets super speedy silver boots. Ungast heads for the statue of Spar we saw on a previous visit to Basra's fortress, and finds what he came for, the wreckage of Lord Spar's automobile. Ungast loads the car onto his balloon, and Julie and Neil help Kia fly. You know, that's interesting. Julie and Neil spent so much time as the normal members of the team, and now they can fly, but Kia, the one member of the quartet who had magic from the beginning, still lacks the power of flight. So much fun stuff to think about in this chapter. I mean, possibly just because I haven't read a Droon book in months. Ungast notices the heroes pursuing him and takes out a guard tower with a fireball to draw the attention of Basra's guards to the heroes while he and the Kindu escape. Chapter 4, Seeing Things. Kia and them evade the guards until Nelag turns up in the Jaffa Wind. He gives them the lowdown on the whereabouts of the royals and powerful people. But before Nelag can take them to Zorfendorf Castle to meet up with Galen, Spar, and Max, Max turns up on a junky flying carpet to report that the three of them were ambushed on the way there. So rather than taking the ship, they all hop on the carpet to help them out, finding Galen and Spar evading Nins in a Pilka-drawn chariot. Almost quaint, isn't it, Nins being a threat again? They drive the Nins off, as Spar isn't doing so hot. He's having trouble breathing and keeping his footing. Max suggests they hide out in Lubalunda, his home village, home of the spider trolls. Galen is reluctant to bring their war to a peaceful people who have avoided it for so long, but Max assures him his people can handle it. Lubalunda is hidden in the mountains of Salif, and Max takes them directly to the secret entrance. We meet Max's people, barely, specifically his nephew Feodor and the spider troll ruler Mayor Tibble. Again, barely. Kia wonders at the significance of the scrap of orange cloth Galen has been fiddling with, and as of this moment I'm wondering that myself. I don't remember if that came back in the last 4 books. They use Tibble's home, the Tree Tower, to get a good view of the Darklands, where Gethwing's forces are on the move. Chapter 5, Tapestry of Evil. Ungast returns to Barrowbork, where Gethwing's followers are forging and preparing equipment and shit. He brings Spar's car to some Nins, who treat the vehicle with the same reverence they'd pay to Spar himself. Gethwing explains that the car holds a bit of Spar's spirit, and that spirit will help Gethwing find something only Spar, and his car apparently, know how to get to. Ungast sets to work repairing the car. Forging montage. Gethwing receives word of the heroes hiding in Lubalunda, and has a plan. Gethwing explains the book's title. He's assembling the Crown of Wizards, a cabal of powerful evil magic users. Himself, Ungast, and at least one other person. Nefu, the dark side of Princess Kia, as seen way back in Special Edition number 2, presumed dead at the time, but now, back in the game. In this book, she's described as dark-haired and red-eyed, which I don't think was true of her description in her first appearance. I think back then she just looked like Kia, but dressed in red instead of blue. Now she's also a brunette to Kia's blonde, which is honestly a better aesthetic. I kind of reflexively pictured her that way in my head anyway. The physical descriptions throughout the series are very inconsistent anyway. Ungast finishes the car and sets out with an army of wraiths to seek out the treasure that the car knows how to find. Or at least that's what this moment makes it sound like. As it turns out in the next couple of chapters, he's just taking the car and Nefu. No wraiths. My bad. Okay. Chapter 6, A Tale of Two Cities. We get a tiny cameo from Flink, bringing news to Galen. If I haven't mentioned, this book is told from the third-person limited perspective of both Ungast and Kia. Mostly Kia, and yet most books are told from Eric's perspective, but he's, ever since he went out of commission, they're changing that detail, even for non-special edition books. So this is special edition. flank is bringing Galen terrible news of all the beastly armies moving across the land and sea of Droon. Even the Scorth have returned. There's a running gag throughout this book of someone, usually ungassed, riffing on Barrowbork's name with some other alliterative word with two B's in it, like Bubble Bath or Blunderbuss or Bumblebee. Yeah, I didn't like it at first. I don't like the mocking of fantasy names, because if you're going to create a fantasy name, all the jerks and idiots in your audience are going to make fun of it anyway. When you have the characters do it, that just expresses a lack of confidence. But the running gag actually comes back in a pretty powerful way a couple of times. So I grew to like it. Spar, via his spiritual connection to his old car, can tell it's on the move again. Kia decides that they can't wait for an army. She, Julie, and Neil will go themselves to enter the Darklands and find out what Ungast is up to. Spar decides to assist. They ride into the Darklands, dodging beasts and, mostly beasts, I guess. They ambush Ungast in a trench called Sunderpass. Kia is pretty stunned and displeased to see Nefu, while meanwhile Ungast can be seen scanning the faces of all of Eric's friends, trying to figure out where he knows them from. Nefu takes them out with an ice storm, and she and Ungast take off. Chapter 7, Sunken Treasure. The gang escape from the ice storm with some genie magic. Spar remembers an old magic trick he used to use before he got the car, forming the ash and dust of the Darklands into a magical sled that skims across the ground. With it, they pursue the car to the Serpent Sea, the conversation they overhear between Ungast and Nefu, revealing very little except that the two like to one-up each other as far as who has the most treasure and evil bling-bling. The island of Kafoo approaches, which the narrative describes as a promontory. That's a big word for a Droon book. I had to look at the definition, and that doesn't happen to me very often, let me tell you. The two evil doubles drive the car into the sea and disappear beneath the waves. Kia summons Nelike to come to them with the Jaffa wind. Characters get from one place to another so quickly in Droon. A map of Droon is provided in the very last book. I should check it against all the fast traveling that gets done throughout the series and see if any of it is at all plausible. Something to think about for the adaptation. For continuity purposes, consistent art direction and set design, don't you know? Eventually, the car bursts out of the water and takes to the air, Ungast and Nefu now toting a large black iron treasure chest. Chapter 8, Taking Sides. As the car flies off, Kia whips out a good Pasha carpet she was keeping on board the Jaffa Wind, the one Max used earlier in the book, having been kind of a knockoff. The three kids in Spar pursue the yellow car, and I'm only just realizing this book how weird it is that Lord Spar owns a car. And it appeared in the first book. What kind of fantasy villain in a Narnia-style alternate world setting drives a car? If I recall correctly, in the first book I commented on how the car was too comical to be a good introduction to Spar as a villain, and talked about giving it the hot rod treatment, but now it does strike me how odd it is that he's introduced driving any car, let alone a cute and funny one. The airplanes that appear throughout Droon I'm less distracted by. Airships are very fanciful, but cars are just so mundane. It's weird, but we'll make it work. This time, Nefu tries to throw off the pursuit by summoning some giant wicked black birds, and there is a startlingly impressive aerial battle. There's a good bit where Neil and Ungast both riff on Barrowbork, and you see a trace of Eric in Ungast. It's good with the riffing with Neil, okay? Like I said, that makes the running gag kind of worth it. Spar performs an awesome super jump from the carpet to the car, and then throws the chest onto the carpet. Unfortunately, this allows Ungast to take him back to Barrowbork as his hostage. And apparently at some point Nefu steals the chest back because the heroes no longer have it after this chapter. I'm bad at reading sometimes. They head back to Lubelunda, where Galen has terrible news. Civilizations such as the Lumpies and the Orkans have fallen to Gethwing's forces. And soon, Lubelunda will be attacked as well. Chapter 9, The Battle of Lubelunda. Nins and Wraiths start besieging the secret entrance to the Spider Troll village, led by Ungast. The Spider Troll's defenses? It actually doesn't go so hot, considering how well things usually go for the good guys in straight fights in this series. Galen has to guard the secret entrance. It's like a choke point, and oh my god, he says, "You shall not pass." He actually says it. That's awesome. Well, they hold off the bad guys for a while. Soon they have to fall back. Galen has a most peculiar epiphany. He tells the children to go to the upper world to find out if Mrs. Hinkle knows a secret about Eric that may be the key. A secret not unlike how they found the Pearl Sea in Eric's house. Galen uses magic dust to summon the rainbow staircase, and the three children ascend it. Chapter 10. The Impossible Riddle. The three of them ascend to the upper world, and, as always, return only a few seconds after they left. Kia puts her Eric disguise back on, but Mrs. Hinkle doesn't buy it for a second. She wants to know where her son is. Kia drops the disguise, and they tell her the full truth from the very beginning. She's devastated, and what they tell her is that they need a secret, something only Eric knows that will draw him out of Prince Ungast. Mrs. Hinkle's first thought is to retrieve the Pearl Sea, not knowing until she finds the box empty that the children have had it for a while now. So they ask, how did the pearl that Uruk made end up in the Hinkle household? Mrs. Hinkle tells that story. When Eric was very little, he fell out of one of the iconic apple trees in the Hinkle front yard, but landed safely somehow and had the Pearl Sea with him when he did. Later, Mrs. Hinkle showed little Eric a picture of her great-great-grandfather in 1909, an early aviator who had a long white beard and wore a white-brimmed white hat. And Eric immediately recognized him as the man who saved him from falling and gave him the pearl. Which, of course, was impossible, as the guy lived over 100 years ago. Mrs. Hinkle suggests that Kia personally give the photograph to Ungast, and maybe he'll remember it. Kia promises that she'll do everything they can to make sure Eric is back home safely tonight. She erases Mrs. Hinkle's memory, and they return to Droon to find Gethwing's flag flying over the sacked Libelunda. No time to go there, though, as the stairs are taking them to the foot of Barrowbork. Chapter 11, The Jewels in the Crown. It's raining when they reach Barrowbork. Atmosphere. Under cover of invisibility, they scale the mountain. When they reach Gethwing's hidden lair, they find Ungast suggesting that the captured Lord Spar might be the fourth jewel in the Crown of Wizards. Ungast has also captured Galen, who isn't fighting back, and brings forth the treasure chest from the Serpent's Sea, which contains the coiled viper. Kia, Julie, and Neil take this opportunity to charge in. In the chaos of battle, they're soon overwhelmed by wraiths, giving Kia only the briefest chance to slip the photo of the aviator into Ungast's pocket. Gethwing wears the crown, the coiled viper that is, and uses it to zap Spar, turning him into his most evil self, the young adult Lord Spar we've known from the beginning. Chapter 12. What's to become of the boy? Now, back in the prime of his life, Spar claims he planned this all along from the moment he returned as an old man. The four evil sorcerers clasp hands, and Gethwing uses the viper to unite them as the Crown of Wizards, whatever that may mean. Nefu uses Galen's magic dust to summon the Rainbow Stairs and send the Kindu to the upper world to scout ahead, as the villains intend to conquer the upper world once they're done with Droon. But then Kia realizes Ungast has looked at the photograph, as it's in a different pocket now. She reaches out to him with their telepathy. First, making another Barrowbork quip, which Ungast smirks at. And then Eric answers. He'll try to hold them off for the 5 days it'll take them to march on Jaffa City. He asks her to bring him the Moon Medallion. Despite this, Eric isn't free of Ungast yet. He can answer Kia telepathically, but I think Ungast is very much in control until later. Tangential detail there, sorry about that. The Crown of Wizards and their army depart Barrowbork for Jaffa City, leaving the heroes behind for whatever reason. And so they have their timeline for the final story arc of the series, 5 days before the army reaches Jaffa City. Galen, however, has to leave the children to their task. He is awaiting Anusa. She will come for him, and they will journey together. While Kia escorts Galen to Zorfendorf, Neil and Julie take the stairs, following the Kindu hunters to Eric's house. And there we go, a deservedly epic special edition that leads us to the final arc. Only 4 books to go, 2 regular ones, and then 2 consecutive special editions to serve as the finale. Anyway, 2 guest stars here. Citizens of the Spider Troll Village. My original ideas were as follows. Still following up from back when I was imagining a live-action adaptation that included all of the troll characters, spider and otherwise, being portrayed by actors with dwarfism. For Max's nephew Feodor, in a live-action adaptation, I thought we'd go with a young Warwick Davis type. Basically, any given child who's a little person, I like to imagine giving a kid their big break, just like Warwick Davis got in Star Wars at the age of 11. As always, when casting a kid, I went with a possible actor for an animated adaptation. Kelly Stables, I don't know, I was running out of real voice actors at this point. And for Mayor Tibble, I wanted to cast Peter Dinklage. It would be a supreme underutilization, but, at the time I figured we'd expand every book a teeny bit. I still want to do that, because stuff happens in the Droon books so fast. I do want to savor moments and stuff. And finally, a fanfiction segment. Let's return to Max the ICBG. We were halfway through it. Chapter 21. Max is getting a 3D ultrasound, which is absolutely captivating. Fang. I'd say it's a pretty common fanfiction thing, right? Pregnancy. Maybe less so, it being depicted as a good thing at the age of 14. I do feel somewhat vindicated, knowing that in the final Maximum Ride book, Max does in fact have Fang's baby at just a year older than that, and it's depicted as pretty much a good thing. I'd have to read that book myself to know for sure, but at least I'm not the only Maximum Ride writer with terrible taste in when to start a family. The real one did it too. The baby is a girl and has wings, and given the rapid healing and aging and whatnot the flock go through, it's expected that the pregnancy will last no more than 2.5 months. I'm not sure if that's a notion that makes sense. The pregnancy ends up even being shorter than that, which I think makes for an interesting surprise, writing-wise, but not especially plausible, biologically speaking. Deep down, I think the whole thing was just that I didn't want to write a pregnancy story. I wanted to write a having a baby story. Chapter 22 is a romantic scene between Nudge and Iggy, where they talk about Fang and Max having their baby and their own relationship, and it's kind of gross. There's still not time to address this ship. I'll get around to it. Chapter 23, Fang finds Max in the canyon, where Max is simmering a bit, hating herself for being, in her eyes, just like the Whitecoats who created them, robbing a child of the opportunity to be human. Fang assures her that this is different, that this baby will likely have a loving home. He proposes to Max with a mood ring he got at the zoo. Angel drops in to let them know they're under attack. Chapter 24. Let's see. So their dorm is being attacked by the forces of Mr. Chu. Meanwhile, OC's Ray and Ram are taking the big guy to observe the flock via accessing the 4th dimension. Or is it 5th? So they can see anything that's going on, but are completely undetectable. That's tech quite a few centuries beyond what you'd normally see in Maximum Ride. I don't buy it here, but it might be a worthy addition to Iris, as that also employs magic. Spoiler alert, I guess. Anyway, Ray and Ram explain that in this dimension, power is a very tangible thing, and people glow according to how powerful they are. Okay, power levels. Any real writer, including the writer of Dragon Ball Z, who introduced the concept, knows that power levels are bullshit. It isn't well advised, but it was important to set up the reveal here. Each member of the flock has a certain power level determined by what color they're glowing, but that's not what they're here to show the big guy. They're here to show him Keegan, who radiates raw power. Ray and Ram have determined that at her power level, she's capable of doing absolutely anything. Back in the real world, Max asks Keegan to double date with them. Chapter 25, let's see. Basically, a total repeat of a chapter from the three-way crossover saga. It's very familiar. It's the one where Nudge wants to take Iggy on a real date while he just wants to make out. And she gets mad at him and reveals that Aaron wrote her a letter asking for her back, and if Iggy won't take their relationship seriously, she's going to take him up on it. And Iggy resolves to repair his relationship from the damage he's just done. I guess I like that bit. Good bit. Chapter 26, Max and Fang doing some English literature homework. Gazzy has a great line about them sucking face and neglecting the rest of them. Definitely going to use that again elsewhere. It's kind of funny and very dark and dramatic. Gazzy is feeling the despair. He wants to be a normal little kid, and Fang tells him that someday he will be, which Max isn't quite convinced by. There's a silent exchange between Albert and Felicia that Max describes as almost criminally romantic, and I don't know, I'm bored. I want the story to get to the good stuff. I mean, there is good stuff in this saga. I know there is. Chapter 27, Albert walks in, thinks Max would benefit from a face-to-face meeting with the big guy. The voice agrees, so Max decides to meet the big guy in the canyon. I keep coming back to that. The canyon. Apparently there's a canyon. Max briefly crosses paths with Iggy on his way back to make a big love confession to Nudge. Max and the other three meet the big guy in the canyon. The big guy came alone, and they agree to talk. Some of my readers were surprised to discover in this scene that the big guy is a giant gecko. I guess I hadn't established that well enough because you were supposed to know that by now. Chapter 28 is another repeat of the Iggy-Nudge story arc from the crossover saga, Nudge revealing to Aaron that this whole thing is just to make Iggy jealous. Aaron objecting to this, Iggy indeed spying on them. Iggy and Nudge get back together, Aaron is heartbroken, Iggy and Nudge feel a little bit bad about that, but declaring nothing should stand in the way of their relationship. You know, it's pretty good. I already did it. I mean, it's not often I just lift whole scenes from the three-way crossover saga, but it seemed pretty solid. Chapter 29, the big guy gives his backstory. The ICBG are made up of dangerous, unstable geniuses who could not be allowed to roam in public. They were imprisoned in a government facility using their gifts to make technology, some of it available to the public, some only to the government. Some years ago, the big guy invented God knows what. A gecko got caught in the mechanism, and the big guy was turned into a human gecko monstrosity. With his new gecko powers, he broke out of the facility along with Jewel and his fellow geniuses and melded each of them with the animal of their choice. They lived in hiding for years, thinking they would never find acceptance until Max and the flock were discovered. They hope that with the aid of Max they can find acceptance in the world. The name International Conglomerate of Bad Guys just being a joke, inaccurate in every respect, and I don't feel much like checking if any previous scenes are actually consistent with all these revelations. I just have a certain suspicion that they ain't, that I actually was presenting them as bad guys at the beginning of the story the way they were in the three-way crossover saga. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, some Chew Corporation goons turn up, led by Jewel, who's decided to turn against the big guy now rather than later. Having originally hoped to do it when the big guy had amassed some sort of power to usurp, he's found the big guy too lethargic for his liking, so he's betraying him now. And Jewel doesn't want acceptance, he wants world domination. Accompanying Jewel are Bridget, which gives Max some smug gratification, and Keegan, to Max's absolute heartbreak. The flock are on the run again, and Max's eyes well up with tears. Chapter 30, the flock fly well into the night. Max fuming about how she should have seen Keegan's betrayal coming, and despairing of how the flock have lost their first true taste of normalcy. Then Max's water breaks. Only 2.5 weeks into her pregnancy, not months, barely even with a baby bump. She's giving birth, which again is pretty moronic. I just had no interest in writing about pregnancy. Wanted the baby to join the cast. They get attacked by robots, and Max blacks out. So yeah, I am not enjoying this story. I hope the overall saga gets better. I don't know if it will. But thus far, this is disappointing me a lot more than the three-way saga did. That concludes this week's podcast, and by this week I mean the past 6 months. You know how it goes. Every time I update, I hope that I'm back on the horse, and I'm usually not, but you won't catch me ever giving up. On living an adult life, yes, but on my passions, no. So, I'll see you next time, and wish me luck.